Hello, welcome back to my channel. I am a women's health and wellness coach and I've also got a master's in women's health, so I know what I'm talking about. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing my own birth story, why I decided to go for elective C-section, how that became an emergency C-section, and what the birth itself was actually like. Before we get into it, make sure you subscribe for weekly videos surrounding topics on women's health as well as my own postpartum journey. So, when I was about 25 weeks pregnant, I decided that I was going to have an elective C-section. I did a lot of research into this, looking at the pros and cons of a vaginal birth as well as a C-section birth, and when I was looking at this, my main focus was my pelvic floor. So I have endometriosis. One of the biggest things that has affected is my bladder, and when I became pregnant, my bladder symptoms got so much worse. I was having extreme painful bladder movements, and I was basically just constantly needing to go. The urgency was so high, and this was before my bump got big. So people were like, "Oh, baby squash in your bladder," and I was like, "No, this has happened from the moment I became pregnant. This has been an issue." So I was really concerned about birth making this worse, especially as my bladder symptoms are the only things with endometriosis I haven't been able to manage, and no doctor has been able to pin down why it's happening. So I was very, very cautious of the fact that I didn't want this to get any worse. So looking at both, I decided that a C-section was the risk that I was willing to take. Whenever it comes to birth or anything when you're making a medical decision, I always feel like it's making a decision on what risk factors you're most comfortable with and what your perception of risk you're happy with, essentially. And for me, a C-section just felt right. And I also just had this feeling that a vaginal birth would end up as a C-section for me anyway. And I was completely right, which I'll get into. So I made that decision. The elective C-section was booked. My midwife supported me from the start. I had to have a conversation with a consultant, and they were like, "Do you know why you're doing this? What are the reasons for it?" And I was like, "Look, I've got a whole pros and cons list here. I know exactly why I'm doing it." I was discussing it with them, and you can have a C-section without needing a whole pros and cons list. So you can just decide, I want a C-section. You can have that maternal choice. I did have, whilst it wasn't medically indicated by my obstetric team, it was medically indicated for me in the sense of I didn't want to make a condition I have worse, which I thought a vaginal birth would do. So had that discussion. That was all booked in, and that was booked in. The date I was given was given to me 2 weeks before, which was not even. I think it was 10 days before it was going to be, but I didn't end up giving birth that day. So I was having to go in for bi-weekly, I want to say. Every 2 weeks I had to have scans done because they thought baby was growing too big. So I had to go in for scans for that because my bump was measuring big for some reason. And I went to scans for that, and when I went in for my final growth scan, I was diagnosed with preeclampsia. And this was when I was 30, had to have been 36 weeks. No. I was 38 weeks pregnant. I was 38 weeks pregnant at this point, and I went in for the growth scan, and that was all fine, but I had preeclampsia, which, to be honest, I had a few symptoms of it, but I was not ignoring them. But when you have so many symptoms in pregnancy, and I had at this point been back and forth in for reduced fetal movements and myself feeling really dizzy, and I was constantly told it's all fine. So I was kind of not fully listening to my body at this point. I was actually having spotted vision, and I had a bit of swelling, but it wasn't extreme and it wasn't a sudden onset of it. And they found I had preeclampsia through my urine. So my blood pressure was high for one screening, but it was the protein in my urine that basically said, "Yep, you got preeclampsia." I spoke to a consultant. They said you have to give birth the next day. So what was an elective planned C-section that would have been the week after was now a emergency C-section that needed to be done within the next day, which I wasn't. So there's 4 types of C-section. You have Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3, and Cat 4. What I didn't know was that I was going in as a Cat 3, which was what I didn't want. So I knew a Cat 3 was basically you go in, you might give birth that day, you might not. I was under the impression that I had to give birth the next day. When I left that consultant appointment, I was basically told, you won't have to come in overnight. I then got home at 6 p.m. I got a call being you need to come in at 8 p.m. So something had to come back in my even my urine or my blood. So I was they need to come in for monitoring. So I was in for monitoring overnight. under the impression that I was going to be having my C-section the next day. I was known by mouth. I was ready for my C-section. The next day came and it basically wasn't 100% if I would be going in, which was really anxiety inducing, and had been told I had to give birth this day. And when they did my monitoring of baby, their heart rate was going up really high, which was not like hadn't been seen before in my monitorings. But I was told by midwives that it looked normal, even though when I was looking at it, it didn't seem normal to me at all. So I was just like, right, I don't know what to do here. And as the day went on, I was like, I don't feel good. This needs to happen today. And then at around 2 or 3 p.m, I got the thumbs up that I would be going in, which was all systems go. And then so that then bumped me up to a Cat 2 emergency for me to go in within the next 2 hours. They bumped it up from Cat 3 to Cat 2, and I'm not entirely sure why that decision was made. It was something to do with my monitorings, which I think it could have been to do with their monitoring in the morning, but one of the midwives was like, look, this needs to be done today. So it got bumped up to a Cat 2, and that meant I had to go in the next 2 hours. So the birth itself, I genuinely could not have had a better birth. It was everything that I thought it would be. I had done so much research into what a C-section is like, what you're expecting, and the anaesthetist was so good at telling me what I'm meant to be experiencing. So they were like, if you feel nauseous, this is because your blood pressure's dipping, please tell us. And that made it so much easier for me to be aware of what I'm feeling. They explained, I knew this going in anyway, they explained that I would feel like I'm being rummaged about a little bit, but I won't feel any pain. So when I went in, I was gowned up and everything. We had to wait a little bit, and then we went in. We were in the theatre within the birthing ward, which doesn't always happen. So I think if you're an elective or you're a Cat 3, you go to a different theatre, at least in my hospital. But because it ended up being a Cat 2, we were put in the emergency theatre, which is in the ward. So we walked down to that, and then I always thought that your partner has to wait outside when they do your spinal. So I was like under the impression, I told my partner, like, look, you're gonna have to wait outside and then you'll come in. And then they were just like, okay, you both want to come in? And I was like, what? So they let him come in with me. He was sat right in front of me, which was quite nice and reassuring. I have a lot of medical anxiety, so I instantly go into fight or flight. My whole body just starts to shake, which I thought would be an issue with the spinal, but the team was so reassuring that it's okay with me shaking. I was literally on the table like this. So you get in, they put you straight on the table, and it's kind of all systems go. There's like 10 people in the room. There's a lot of people in there. I had met the consultant before we went down, and I explained to him that I had endometriosis and stuff, and he was like, okay. He went over how he basically said it'll do it as gently as possible to avoid any adhesions being formed and stuff. So because the more aggressive they are with a C-section, the more likely you're going to have scar tissue from it. So that's what I was told anyway. So he said he would do it as gently as possible for that, and that was reassuring going in. So when I went in, I had already seen a consultant who was going to be doing the surgery, which was quite nice to know that you're not going to a random room with loads of strangers. And then even though I had only met him like an hour before, but I got onto the table and they all systems go, monitoring you, putting things on you, and I was just like, this needs to slow down. I am going to have a panic attack, so let's slow this right down because we were doing this too quickly. I need to explain to move it slower, and I can't have it happen as quickly. And then one lady came over and explained every single thing each person was doing to me, and that made it so much easier. And then I had to do the whole like bending over. So you have to basically have really bad posture. So you got to like curve your spine down for them to be able to put the spinal in, and you think you're doing it enough and then you're not, so you have to go further, and they give you like a cushion to make that easier for you to do it over. But yeah, that was an odd one. But the only thing that I felt when they were doing it was the numbing injection that they put in first. That really stung, and then after that I felt nothing, and I truly mean nothing. I didn't know that the spinal had gone in. Next thing I was told was that you need to lie down because your leg is going to go numb now. And I was like, oh, okay. So I laid down. My partner was like moved to a corner where they laid me down and put me onto the bed and stuff. And then they, after that, the anaesthetist was just explaining like what I'm feeling, and you can basically feel the like numbness travel from your legs up to your body. It's a really odd thing to say, but you can feel it travel up, and it got to about, I want to say here, the numbness of it, and it had this like icy spray, and the icy spray is the same sensation of pain. So they were like, right, we're gonna put this icy cold spray on you, and you're gonna tell me when you can feel it. And I was like, okay. So they're doing it, and I was like, oh, I can feel it here. And I think I can feel it like at this point. And they're like, okay, wait a little bit longer, and then did it again, and then I couldn't feel it until here. And the only thing I could move was my arms, nothing else could move. And they were moving my legs, and that was really weird to see because you could see they were moving my legs, but I couldn't feel that. So that was all okay. And then I said, please don't tell me when you start. So I was just kind of chilling. I was waiting to feel the pressure and stuff, and we were just chatting to the team, and I really needed everyone to chat. They offered first to put music on, but I was like, you got whatever music you're playing, I'm happy with just talking. So I was just chatting to, my partner was here, the anaesthetist was here, and another anaesthetist was here. So I was just chatting to them, and there was like 2 assistants on the side, and there was like loads of people in the room. Like my midwife, that was like the community midwife, was to the right of me, and I was surrounded by people that were just being really calm, so I felt calm. And I was just sat on there for a while, and I was like, have they started? Like, I know I said I didn't want to know, but have they started? Because I'm not feeling anything. And one of them just goes, oh yeah, they're fully in. No, the babe's nearly here. And the anaesthetist behind us then started to not explain what was happening, but explain what he could see. So that was like kind of surreal to know that, okay, they can see his head now, which was mad. He was like, oh, there's loads of hair. And I was like, whoa. And then my partner was, because they made it all seem so normal, like that this was happening, that I was cut open and they were bringing the baby out. Like they just made it feel so normal, and like this is what they do every day. That my partner's, I'm like, oh, can I have a look? Because if he was being told what they could see, and no one was like, I don't know, when you think about it and you talk about other people, it's all a bit squirmish and stuff, but when you're in the room and no one else is squirmy, you're like, okay, let's see. And they're like, do you want to see? And I don't know how they thought I would be able to see anything, because I couldn't lift myself up, so I couldn't see anything. But they like pulled the curtain down, and he got to watch baby be born, which was so cool. I didn't really get to see it, but I did get to see him when he came out. And they actually used a kiwi, which I didn't know they were going to use. So they used like a ventouse to slowly bring him out, which basically meant that when babies are born, they have this fluid in their lungs, and when they go through the birth canal, that fluid gets squeezed out. But if you're coming out from a C-section, there isn't as much like closure of there's like, it's not as small, so this fluid doesn't come out as much. But they managed to get out most of the fluid by doing it so slowly, and they like just held him to me, and he just had like the fluid out of his lungs like coming out, and I was like, okay, that's my baby. He unfortunately came out floppy, so his limbs weren't like, they weren't responding, they weren't having any reflex instinct, so they put him straight on the resus table. And you hear about things like this, and I really thought I'd be panicking, but the midwife and everyone who was seeing to my little one was so calm that I still remained calm. I was just like, okay, like, they know what they're doing, he'll get his movement back. And he just kept doing it, and in time he did get his movement back, and it felt so long. At this point, I didn't even know what's going on. Obviously, they're stitching me back up and doing whatever they need to do, but I'm just focused on my baby. And my partner went round and was able to see him on the resus table, and once his limbs were coming back, they're like, you can take some pictures now of him if you want. So they would take some pictures, and that was really nice. And then once he was like back, like, because what they would do is they try and do skin to skin straight away, but because he needed to be on the resus table, they once he was able to come over to me, they wrapped him up and brought him over, and then unwrapped him on me, so then I could have skin to skin, which was really nice. But yeah, that was all really nice. But what was a bit of a surprise was finding out why he had come out floppy, and that actually, if I had given birth vaginally, I would have most likely hemorrhaged. So I actually had 2 growths on my placenta, which are called like 6 inches. I can never say the word. I had 2 growths on my placenta that had detached, and no one had picked it up in scans. So the consultant was fuming. And then also my uterus had looked like it had been majorly contracted. And so the consultant was like, she must have really high pain tolerance. And I was like, yeah, I have told people this, because I actually went in a week prior with early labour symptoms, and I had been in early labour for the whole week, but I was told that I couldn't be because I wasn't taking a paracetamol. I have endometriosis. If I was taking paracetamol from on and off period pains, which is what you're told early labour feels like, and is what it felt like, I would be fucked, because I have so much more pain normally. So I was just like, this isn't helpful anyway. So turns out baby was born with low oxygen, and I had low cord gases because I had basically been in labour for a week, but like early labour, it just hadn't progressed. And he was very angry to consultant. But that was just, the birth itself was so amazing, but all the information that I found out afterwards about how my care had been and how things had been missed wasn't as amazing. And that was a shock, and also just a bit like, what the fuck. And my placenta had to be sent off for testing, and I had to have that approved, and I still don't know what that result was because you don't have a follow-up, which is just crazy. But yeah, the birth itself was so as perfect as it could have gone with the amount of research I did into cesareans. That couldn't have gone any better. It was just the information that I received afterwards. I was like, oh, okay, a lot was missed in my care prior, and there's already so many inquests into maternity care, and it's just a shame for that to have been the case. But yeah, that was my birth story. If you have any questions about my birth story, please do leave a comment or send me a message. I'll be more than happy to go into it a bit more, but I hope this can be helpful and be a bit reassuring. When I was looking for C-section experiences, there was basically none on here. It was mainly ones from like 5 years ago, which just wasn't helpful, and or you hear conversations of like how C-sections are so bad. But I had a really positive experience, and I know it's not the case for everyone, but I hope this can be reassuring for you when you're trying to make your birth choice decisions. So yeah, thank you for listening, and there'll be another video next week. Bye.